Hello and welcome to the AI Digest. My name is Joaquin Melara and I'm your host. With me today is Yan Vishnepolsky. Yan, it's a pleasure to have you. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yan, where are you based out of? You're based out of Hawaii, right?
Yep, in Honolulu.
What kind of things are there to do in Honolulu?
Oh, well, it's better to ask probably what you can't do. Like, there's the beach on one side of the city, and then there's mountains on the other. And so, if you want to climb the mountains or if you want to swim in the ocean, you can do either one. The weather is always good year round if you like warm weather. But even if you like cold weather, there is an observatory elsewhere in Hawaii where you could where it does get snow, and it's possible to go skiing there. And so, like literally anything that comes to your mind, you could probably do in this state. And so, it's pretty awesome.
And the depth of the water surrounding Hawaii is what, 3 feet, or it's like a waist level, no?
Yeah, it doesn't like get deep really quickly. So from like a safety perspective, it's very good. There where I live, which is in this area called Waikiki. There's two beaches within walking distance that I can go to. One is a little bit more crowded than the other, but there like the other that one the one that's more crowded is like very sandy, and the other one that's less has like some rocks in the water. But it's like to have like two different beaches to choose from within walking distance is definitely a luxury.
Sounds like paradise.
Yes,
So Jan, you are a consulting user researcher,
that's right.
and in addition to that, you also host your own podcast. Um, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do as a user researcher, and feel free to plug in the podcast that you run as well.
Yeah, sure. So basically, as a user researcher, I lead teams. I've been in UX user experience for about 15 years now, probably like somewhere like 13, 14 years. In the last 5 years of those, I've been specializing as a user researcher and leading user research teams for all sorts of companies and contract roles. Um, that includes JP Morgan Chase, American Express, Ford, um, and other brands. Nowadays, I'm working as what they call an AI admin at this company called Data Annotation, but really I'm doing user research work yet again in an AI setting, and that's with um, companies like Bard, ChatGPT, Claude, and so forth. And so there's all sorts of different experiences that I've had relating to user research because of my consulting background.
And your podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast is something that I started after. So I briefly had held a full time role for about 9 months, and when I left that role in April, I had a whole bunch of free time that I tried to figure out what to do with, and I was like, why not do a podcast that talks about AI and user research? Because I've done some exploration in that area, both about like how user researchers can work on AI products, but also how AI products could be used to help user researchers. And both of those topics are of great interest to me, and they're the subject of the podcast. And so it's been a great. I apologize. It's been a great opportunity for me because it's allowed me to meet many interesting people who come onto my show as guests, and the audience is also great. They have so many interesting questions to ask, and so I really love our audience as well. And so I'm just glad that I did this podcast. It's called Human-Centered AI, and you can find us on LinkedIn.
And you do your shows live, right?
That's right. That's right. I find that more fun. I've gotten very used to like just answering questions on the fly and adjusting to what's going on. And so it has like a different kind of energy doing it live because of the audience, and you never know what the audience is going to say or do, and it's just like riding off of that energy is a rush.
No, that sounds like a lot of fun. I may have to change the format at a later date, maybe next year. I don't know, but I like having some sort of safety
Yeah.
isolation. I think it makes it a little bit more personal. But
Yes.
I think you mentioned with the context of your podcast, sort of what the focus of this conversation is going to be around um, AI and UX and UI, and
Yes.
put it in the blender, and this is what you got.
That's right.
So I just want to get a little context from your background, right? We had a little bit of a pre-recording conversation, and it was getting really interesting. So we hit the record button, but you started out with an interest in science fiction, fantasy. Your parents kind of pushed you along to be involved with computer programming and putting computers together at an early age.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that shaped your interest in what you're doing now?
Yeah, so my parents, so nowadays it's unusual. It's like not unusual for kids to be involved with computers at an early age, but when I was growing up, it was pretty unusual. And on top of that, my parents were both programmers, both working at IBM for a great portion of my childhood, and so that actually shaped my education quite a bit. I got, of course, the standard education of going through school and all of that, but I also continued learning when I came home from my parents because my parents kept teaching me about computers and how to use them, but not like directly. They never like actually like said like do this and do that. They just like encouraged me to break the computer, so to speak, and then put it back together again, and then do that again and again and again, and find limitations of the computer. And I was started doing that from like the age of like 3, and I think that around the age of 10, I learned how to code my first language, which was Visual Basic. And my parents really encouraged me to like set up my own websites. I think it was GeoCities, like that was my first website that I set up, and they just like kept pushing me to like learn more about the practical side of computers. Of course, like everyone else, I also played computer games, but like a large part of it was also like learning the technical aspects of computing, and then like I always had an interest in sci-fi and fantasy books. I was always a Star Trek fan, and I had like a whole wall of Star Trek books growing up, and so that kind of sparked my imagination when it came to working with computers to this day. I often think back to the sci-fi books that I read back then and am reading now, and it helps incentivize me and inspire me to do more to recreate the world of the sci-fi books.
And you know, you have such a wide range of experiences in your consulting. Oh. So you have such a wide range of experiences from your consulting with your user research career. Um, what influence did this science fiction and early childhood experiences have on your pursuit of this?
I feel like it inspires me, particularly now when it comes to AI, because AI was such a big feature of most of the science fiction books that I read. And so now when we have AI in the real world to some degree, kind of like those books, I can't help but think back to like what how the science fiction authors imagined it working, and then try to figure out ways to implement it in a similar way and see if when it comes to like user research. Do my users actually like that? Is that what they're looking for, or do they want something else? And experimenting with that.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about AI. Let's define the ground rules of what AI is and how you define it. What do you think AI is?
Well, I think that AI could be defined a number of different ways. I like the definition that the generative AI comes from deep learning, and so it's like a subsection of deep learning. Um, it was formed based off of neural networks. Um, the Other kinds of definitions that I've seen are by type of AI. And so there's generative AI, there's transcription AI, there's the kind of AI that we see in our social media feeds, which predicts like the next post that we should see based off of our interests. There's computer vision. All of these and others are how I would define AI. But generally, the idea is that it has a kind of its own intelligence that can supplement or assist human intelligence.
And in the context of your practice, how do you see it playing a role?
Oh, everything. So I just like as soon as ChatGPT became like a thing, I tried to think of ways that I could use it in my day to day work. So much of user research work is text based, unlike what UX designers do with the wireframes and prototypes. Our output tends to be an insight or a report, and so and concepts travel so well through human language. Of course, there's limitations of human language which to come up when we talk about AI, but nonetheless, like it's powerful enough that I see it being transformative for any kind of researcher, including user researchers. And so I made that connection early on, and I dived into it, and I tried to explore ways that I could add AI into my work. And I did that by thinking like if I have a task to do that is like part of my day to day, and I'm not using AI, how do I add AI to that task so that it can assist me in getting that work done faster or better or both? And so by adopting that kind of approach, I added basically AI to almost every step of my process.
On the other side of the coin for this topic, where do you see we need a little bit more research, understanding, and ethical considerations around adoption of AI?
Everywhere. Like I feel like it's probably more than we know, these kinds of ethical considerations and operational concerns. It's always deeper than we think, and the more that you explore AI, at least in my case, the more that I see like layers to the onions of ethics. Like, yeah, of course, like everyone knows that AI was trained in many cases by using copyrighted sources and not getting permission. But that's just like the top level layer, and then there's the participant layer of research, or like if you're like a user researcher, you're using real world participants for your research. um, how do you avoid harming the participants, and protecting the data and so forth now that AI is in the mix? So there's like so many different levels to consideration when it comes to AI, and I feel like that's something that we're going to keep exploring as AI keeps evolving. It's going to be in a never ending journey.
One thing we touched upon before we hit the record button was the fact that the adoption of AI, or when ChatGPT came on the scene, it felt unreal. It felt uncanny. It felt like
Yes.
we were in one of those TV shows from the late 90s or late 80s, like The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, The Dark Side.
Yes.
Um, what do how do you feel now? And what do you think made you feel that way? That it felt weird?
Well, because like it always seemed like it was so far off, and everything else that like was in the sci-fi books didn't seem anywhere close to happening, and but all of a sudden AI in particular was happening, and it was happening right now, I feel like that created a feeling of being unreal. But also part of it was that I hadn't really explored it yet enough. And the more that I explored it the more that I understood it, the more that I realized that it had its limitations, and it has its problems and so forth. And so like this is more like it's not like we're all of a sudden in a sci-fi book with the kind of AI that's talked about in the sci-fi books and those shows, but more like an intermediate step where we get there. And I feel like that makes it a lot easier in terms of the uncanny valley.
Where do you think we need to go from here? I mean, people are adopting this into workflows in the organization. Um, Clearly, it's it's had an immeasurable impact in our everyday lives. People are using it to replace or augment certain tasks that they perform. Um, what kind of research do you think we need to be focusing on to ensure safer or responsible adoption of this technology?
Absolutely. So I think that we need to consider, like you mentioned, the ethical considerations. We need to consider the operations considerations as well. Like, how do we deploy it at scale? We need to consider the limitations of the technology because that's where it's going to fall short. And then we need to consider how those limitations apply to the work that we're trying to do because those limitations are going to come up in different ways for different companies in different contexts. And so, all depending on that particular context is how we use AI. But most importantly, as a user experience professional, I'm going to say that how does it shape the experience of our users, and what will the users start to expect as AI becomes more and more commonplace, so that there are no gaps in the UX experience.
What about on the level of accessibility? I mean, not everybody's going to have access to these things, and I think adoption and acclimation to this tooling is going to widen according to how much access you have to this technology, how far
Right.
you can tinker with it. What do you think about that?
I think that it's accessibility is both a concern and an opportunity with AI. In terms of accessibility being an opportunity, I feel like AI can, because it's generative and it can adjust to the particular situation of a person with accessibility needs. Everyone has different kinds of accessibility needs, and they might come and go over the course of their life. It's just a question of degree and type. The fact that generative AI can adjust according to a person's needs will make it a very powerful tool, hopefully, in the near future to helping people with accessibility needs. Vice versa.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so in terms of like for the flip side of the coin, the accessibility needs to be available now for AI in terms of people with accessibility needs. And right now, it's obviously not very accessible, both from like a bias level because the data is biased towards a particular subsection of the population, but also in terms of the interface itself. It's very 90s in some ways. Like it goes back to almost the command line level interface, which is something that people are not very used to. On top of that, going beyond just like accessibility needs to like the everyday person, it's not very accessible because it expects people to know what they want, and maybe people don't know what they want. Maybe people don't even know what question they have in their mind when they go to talk to Chat GPT. And so it's to expect people to know what they want and ask ChatGPT accordingly is a pretty high bar.
I think you bring up a couple good points there in terms of viewing this adoption of the technology. There's media illiteracy, technology illiteracy,
Yeah.
there is no clear use case that people can maybe apply it like directly into their thing, because we don't have a form of educating people as to how to adopt with emerging tools or try out these aren't widely provided as a service now, in our education system, in our universities. It's fairly new technology, so people are still adapting to it.
Yeah.
And even if we're adapting to it, not everybody's going to be able to adapt to it as quickly because they have different professions. A plumber is not going to be uh, on the computer all day every day, so they're not going to be able to reap the benefit of how do they multiply their advertising for plumbing services or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, and vice versa. Like, so my wife is in the field of pharmacy, and in pharmacy, it's a very high risk field where, like, if you give the wrong medication to somebody, not only could you lose their job, but you could potentially kill somebody. And so, like the way that ChatGPT makes mistakes, my wife could not conceivably use it for her work to learn anything about pharmacy because there's just too many risks associated with that. And so, like, in high risk fields where every word and every action matters, like it's just not there yet in terms of where it needs to be. And so like in places like design where there's room for error and iterating, I think it's great. But in other fields like the medical field, or legal, like there's that famous story about a lawyer who used ChatGPT to go into a courtroom and form the logic of his argument, and it was all just fabricated. And so, like, it all comes down to needing to check your work, and for some people, it just doesn't make any sense to spend all that time checking it. They could just do it faster themselves, and so it really depends a lot on your context. But this is once again points back to accessibility and who is this for.
And you said earlier there's a small subset of people that have been working in this, working around it, are ready to consume it and adopt it. But there are other factors like neurodivergency, you
That's right.
know, uh, mental accessibility. Like some people have cognitive impairment, sense impairment, just a variety of different like physical impairments. I mean, there's just so many different things, cultural incompatibilities. This is primarily used in English. I don't know if it's available in different languages yet, because it was primarily trained on like
That's right.
American
That's the bias. That's the
English.
bias.
So context and cultural segmentation is also an important aspect of this. Um, yeah,
And
man.
so and it also comes down to like members of the minority community as well, because like it's not just generative AI that has this kind of bias. For in terms of computer vision applications of AI, it has trouble identifying people with darker skin. And that has a major applications for like day-to-day life as police forces start to use computer vision technology to identify people. And so there's real danger associated with this. For coming to neurodiversity, as a neurodiverse professional, I find that I use AI differently than others, and I find that, but I also find that if you look at the conversations that people are having, the way that people use AI will be wildly different depending on not just what they do for a living, but who they are. The most vivid example for me that I saw was I had a coworker at my previous job who I think of as like almost like my twin. He and I just like have very similar interests, and he also immediately got interested in AI, and he was actually interested in automation long before even AI like really kicked off the way that it has. And so he like really dove into it too. But when I started looking at his conversations with AI, they were so different from mine. And so like that showed me that like if you put two very similar people together and think that they're going to use AI the same way, they probably won't.
People are using it as a new means of accessing information to make decisions, like Google.
That's right.
That's that's sort of what to me is interesting, that people used to rely on books and gathering information from experts or television or their library. Then that transitioned into accessing information via Google, making that a verb.
That's
Google
right.
that, or let's check
Yes.
Google, let's verify facts on Google, which aren't, which, haven't always been based on facts. It's who can produce content and rank it SEO compliant or whatever. But now we're going into a further derivative of information gathering, which is we're going to have something interpret this information to make a decision or recommendation on your behalf. Um, I don't know what you think of that in the context of user research, but I'm
It's
curious.
an interesting problem, and it's something that I'm going to address in more detail on my show later on this year. We actually have an episode planned for that already. But what I see is the changing nature of the internet. It's already happening, that people are no longer going to have to rely on the old school browser searches. They're going to. It's already happening that people get the information that they need from a generative AI, and so they don't need to visit a website anymore. And so there's no way that this isn't going to impact the monetization of websites and how people make advertising money. And advertising is such a huge portion of the internet and how it works, that this is going to have massive impacts on, and is already having massive impacts on how advertising revenues are impacting how the website functions. And so if people can just get the answer that they need from a chatbot and they don't need to visit a website anymore, but then that website, that chatbot getting that information from browsing websites and getting that data from websites, it's almost like the internet is cannibalizing itself through generative AI, and that is a major concern. And I'm not really sure what the answer is going to be to that situation. That's something that I'm actively researching and exploring right now in preparation for that episode. But I do think that it's going to be very transformative, and the kind of internet that we're going to see in the very near future. Um, in some cases, right now.
You were saying right
The
now.
Yeah, the way that the internet is going to change, or is changing right now, is going to be fundamental, and it's going to affect the way that we know it, the way that we access information, and the way that we learn, and the way that businesses function. There's no way that it will not.
One thing that to me is incredibly interesting is that people are using it to augment their capabilities in terms of summarizing or rephrasing or brainstorming or scaffolding ideas, refining ideas. Uh, it may not all fall on like the idea of being fact based, but just having a starting point to jump off of and create content in a
Yeah,
responsible manner when you're dealing with accurate factual information.
yeah,
That's cool with me. But on the other side of the spectrum, there are other irresponsible agents that,
hmm
they kind of just abuse the capability of spinning up nonsense and doing it in mass to reach like SEO ranking and all this stuff. I mean,
yeah.
there's like so many layers of concern as to like if anything that I read and access, will it contain a shred of fact or evidence, or will it all be just a statistical parrot, you know, giving me some noise?
So there is this aphorism that, like, basically technology could be used equally for good or evil. I think that that argument is wrong. That not every technology can be equally used for good or evil. Let's take an example: a gun versus a hammer. One is used to build a house and has been clearly designed not to be a weapon, and the other has been designed to be a weapon. And the more that we design AI to be non-harmful, the more that we design it to be a force for good rather than something that hurts people. And so this is a problem that has a solution, and it's in our hands. We have agency to shape AI to be something that's good for people.
I think that's a really interesting and refreshing perspective on technology. It's like breeding animals, right? There are attributes that are desirable and iterations that you can kind of bring out through releases or whatever. Uh,
Hmm.
but you're right. We can't say blindly this thing is inert and it has no intent. Yeah, the intent was baked into it when you manufacture it at scale.
And designed it because it is every design decision is has an intent, and hopefully that's the it considers the intent of the users, but at least it has the intent of you, the product owner, the product manager, the business person who's behind it. You wanted that product to do something, and so the more that you design it to in that direction, the less the chance that it's going to be something that harms people. And
So,
this applies to AI.
so let's talk about this from the context of your expertise. I mean, you've worked in a range of domains, in a range of projects.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the methodology that you use and how you can consider using AI to augment that. And then let's look at those ethical considerations.
So to give a very product answer, it depends. It really what it does. I could do better than that. I can give you what it depends on. It depends on the industry. It depends on the culture of the team. It depends on the business and where they're at. Are they like an early stage company that's a startup, or are they like a company that has been around? Because I've worked in both, and both require very different solutions. It depends on like when it comes to the culture of the team, like what tools are they already using, and then on top of that, like there's many different ways that you could use a user researcher. It could be anywhere ranging from like research ops, which I've done um, for a portion of my career, but there's also like the hands-on kind of research where like you're actually I'm doing the research myself, and then there's also the aspect of being a research leader, and so my process really depends on all of these different factors and more. Like what work has already been done from a research perspective is like a question that I almost immediately always ask whenever I'm joining any team, so that way I don't reinvent the wheel. So there's just like a number of different considerations, and the amount of considerations and my perspective towards them changes with every year of my career. I just like learn to consider more and more aspects of the context as I get into any particular role.
How about this? Let me shift the question and say if you're entering a greenfield project versus a brownfield project, the greenfield project being in a resource constrained startup ecosystem with no prior background or knowledge or
Sure.
trained staff, and you have to be hands on. Let's talk about that scenario, and then we can consider multinational, complex matrix resource intensive environment.
Yeah. So the goal in most projects that are in like a startup environment would be to just get a product out if you don't have one already. Like get it to this to the point where you have something tangible, and that could be through wireframing, through prototyping, through iterating, even like just doing some basic user research, informing the direction of your product and where you want it to go is a step forward. But the most important thing is to actually start taking steps forward in that direction, because like it seems overwhelming often. Like you start looking at what you wanted to do, and you realize, oh my god, this is just too much. How am I supposed to get started on this? It just seems like an endless journey, and every journey starts with the first step. And so you just have to make that first step and and move in the right direction.
What is the first pragmatic step you could take in a resource constrained sort of dynamic environment where you're just kind of trying to maximize learnings? Because that's what a startup is. You're
Yeah.
trying to maximize your learnings around a hypothesis. I would like to make the service for this person because I think there's a hole in the market. So, under those constraints, how would you operate?
So the North Star for me would be in that kind of environment, like what many people call a proof of concept or a minimal viable product. Like you want to build towards that. And so you want to start working towards defining what should be in your minimal viable product that gives the idea of what it's going to be once you have more funding or once you get more clients, or once you have revenue, whatever that is. What you want to get it to the point where you're no longer investing more money than you're getting back, and you want to do that as early as possible in a way that the concept of the product is there, and it's clear that that you have something different that is worth buying. And so once you get to that point, you're in a much better shape. And so how do you get to that point? You need to do user research or market research or both. You need to understand your team. You might need to recruit some people for that team. You might need to be aware of like who your competitors are and what they've already done and what you're going to do versus what they've done. Competitive analysis. All these sorts of aspects are crucial to launching a product. If you are lucky enough to have someone who's a user researcher on your team, having them do what is known as generative research, which is like research towards understanding the direction of the product, otherwise also known as strategic research. If you can have that kind of vision, or research supporting your vision, that can go a really long way towards launching a product and being confident that this has a future.
So I'm really I really love market research. I love steeping in the knowledge and understanding what makes. Oh man. So yeah, personally, I love doing market research. I love understanding competitors. I love understanding, sort of what is the moving trends and why people would be adopting whatever solution, products, or service that you're putting out there. Um, I don't have a big background or familiarity into that generative research, and I'm also curious, boots on ground, how do you maximize the amount of insight or the amount of learning that you can gather from keeping customers in the loop? There's the early adopters, the people that you're trying to launch this pilot program with, the proof of concept, as you said. How do you get it in the hands of them, and how do you not influence them to give you their true perspective on that?
There's a number of different approaches to that, and it really again depends on your team. Like there's this concept called radical participatory research, where as opposed to like researchers going off by themselves and conducting research, they get the users involved right from the start. And so that's really a really great methodology, I think, if your team is open to it, to working with users and getting them involved. So like, rather than like asking your users questions in a constrained research environment and then writing a report and then sharing it with your team, have the users involved with the whole process from beginning to end. And that could be like really powerful, particularly like in an early stage product, because like that's when you can really shape the direction of where you want to go. Another thing that's really cool with generative research is that it's not like you're evaluating something that already exists. You're
Mm.
considering something the direction of where you want it to go, and that's what generative really means in this case. And so like what you want to think about, like asking open-ended questions, maybe like giving the product to people to play around with if it's a physical product, observing them with it over time, like perhaps during like what's known as a diary study, so that they take it home with them, and then like give you their thoughts over a period of time. Um, all these different kinds of approaches and others can be used for generative research and can be very powerful tools. It all depends on the kind of product that you want to create and how open your team is to these different kinds of approaches, or like even something basic like a user interview, which is like you sit down with a person and you ask them open-ended questions so that you can understand their persona, who they are. That's already like very powerful generative research that can drive the direction of the product as well. Like it doesn't have to be something fancy, just like or unknown to like UX designers or product designers. Like you could just stick with the well-known methods if that's what you're good at as an individual, and just use those to understand your your audience, your users, your consumers, and shape the product accordingly.
Okay, now let's look at the other side of that spectrum where you have existing research, where you have existing prototypes, where you are entering maybe a team that already has established procedures, operations, different user research, user design folk. How would you step into that environment to contribute meaningfully?
First, I need to understand in that environment where they're at, because everyone is at a different place organizationally, and then on an individual level in the team. Some people might be, for instance, UX designers or product designers, but they really understand user research and they love user research and they want to like really dive into it. And because of their love for user research, they may even be spending more time doing user research than doing product design because they just have a title that doesn't quite fit them. Like that's a situation that I've seen before. That's a situation that, to some extent, I've been in before I became a user researcher. And so, like, it really depends on like who the person is. Other kinds of people, like, they just don't care. They don't want the research. They're not interested in user research. They just want the end result. And power to them because they have their own skill set and their own set of interests. And mostly because of they're that focused, they're very good at that aspect, and I need that because I don't have that set of skills, and so like that's particularly a common mentality, although not with all developers, but with many developers, and so but developers can do something that I can't do, very good at coding, and so I like just finding ways to work with the team according to my strengths and where the gaps are, so that I could deliver a value is what I always look for when I'm joining any team. And I think that like on an organizational level, understanding what if they have done user research before, what sort of user research that have they done, but then also like what was the intent behind it, what was the problem that they were trying to solve, what made them do it, that user research, then how do those user research priorities align with the product roadmap, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of different considerations that I would take, and the number of considerations actually would probably be larger in some ways than with a startup because it's an existing ecosystem with other people, and it's hard to anticipate what those other people have done.
I appreciate that you start out by reading the room, measuring the temperature, looking at the
Exactly.
macro, looking at the micro. Because as you said, you're not gonna arrogantly thrash your way and say my way or the highway. When you're entering an existing ecosystem, you're being
That's
invited
the
into the house,
that's
right?
the difference, I think, between like, and this might be true outside of UX as well, but I think that an experienced professional is less dogmatic. They know how to adjust like what they've learned over the course of their career and what they believe in to the people that they're going to be working with to get the same results. Whereas like many people that I've seen who are very passionate about UX and they're junior and they join a team and they're like, no, it has to be done this way because it's the right way, and it's going to really impact the users and this and that with like a starry-eyed expression in their face. And I get it. Like user research is really cool, but not everyone is going to think that way, and you have to be aware of that. And then the other thing is that you don't know as much as you think you know, and if it applies to me with 15 years of experience, that it certainly applies to someone who's brand new to the field. It's just like try to keep an open mind and keep exploring because that's what user research is all about is curiosity.
Now, speaking of curiosity, I'm curious, how have you championed successful changes, successful projects from start to finish? You don't have to use company names, but certainly just painting a little bit of the backdrop and, what were some of the challenges that you needed to overcome. I think that'd be really useful for the audience
Sure.
to get a better
So,
understanding of.
so like basically the outcome of successful user research is insights. Like so you learn something useful that you can take away to the team that impacts the bottom line or the direction of the product. And a lot of people think that that's about like writing a report. It doesn't have to be like writing a 100-page report. Like it might be interesting to, like, if you're working on a team of user researchers, and so that's not like, I'm not going to say that that's the wrong answer, but it could, but many times it's not the right answer. Like if you're working alone and you're the sole user researcher and you're the one who's really passionate about it, writing a 100-page report might just like drown people in information that they don't understand. And so like while you will certainly prove that you understand the topic very well, the insight has a good chance of being lost. Where like in that kind of environment, maybe the right way to approach it is to just say like, this is what I learned as an outcome of the research, or somewhere in between, like do like a PowerPoint presentation with nice visuals, and that's something that many people in tech are used to, is a PowerPoint presentation. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel. If people are used to PowerPoint presentations, give them a PowerPoint presentation. It's not so much like the format of the output so much as like the learning that came out of it, and how did it impact the roadmap, and how did it change things. And if you really changed the roadmap, or if you really impacted the bottom line based off of what you learned, people will remember it. And you don't need to go and sell it as hard because you've done good work.
I think your experience is showing, man. I think that yeah, I think your experience is showing because everything you're saying is on key with expert opinions of it depends. Here's why. Here's
Yeah.
the outputs. But it's a level of consideration. It's a level of seeing that there's a lot of dynamic elements at play, and you really can't navigate or impose yourself until you have an accurate reading of how you're supposed to function in that sort of environment, right?
But like everything, even to that, there are times where like I do think that like you need to lean in, and that's particularly when you're a leader. And so like as a leader, or at least a senior professional, either way, and you've been doing this for a long time, like let's say at least a decade or so. It's going to be different for different people, so I'm just throwing a number out there. But if you've been doing this for a while, then people are actually paying you for your opinion, not so much what you know and the factual information that you have in your head. But they actually care, in a good company, they'll care about what you believe in. And so that's how you know that you landed in at a good job, is if they actually like ask for your opinions and then take them seriously. And so like once you've gotten that kind of like onboarding process out of the way, then they will start asking for your opinion, and you'll start giving it, and then they start adjusting based off of what you believe in, because they know that they will impact their product, and they're willing to trust you that far.
Now we're describing political and educational campaigning, right?
That's
Which is something that people don't like to hear. It should be about the work, and the work is sufficient. And if they don't get it, then it's their loss. In the real world, it gets to you have to be a change maker and an influencer within an organization and within the team, because not everybody has a full understanding of the value that can come from insights of the customer, insights of the product, insights from research, insights from from competitors. You can derive insights from an entire ecosystem, outside and inside. And
Yes, and you should. The more sources of information that you use, as long as you can trust those sources of information, of course, the more reliable your data is probably.
but I think that the point that you were making is that you can't just approach it with raw passion and
Yeah, it's especially not from the get go. I wouldn't recommend it. It's speaking as someone who's like made that mistake myself. I would not recommend that approach, because it doesn't. You need to, just like anything in life, you have to. There's a certain portion of sales that are involved in this field as well. Like you have to convince people that your approach is right, and if you get religious or dogmatic about anything in life, including user research, you're going to turn people off. Exactly. They're going to get stuck into their path, and you're going to get stuck into your path, and there's not going to be a meeting of the minds. And that meeting of the minds is very, very crucial for a user researcher.
what are some of the common problems or challenges that you have to overcome when you're entering into these engagements, particularly in new engagements where people haven't really had collaborations with a user experience designer or researcher, sort of
Yeah.
just that area of discipline.
Yeah, so I need to like understand the people that I'm working with first. Like it's like the team that I'm on, who's on the inner team that I'm on, and who and what made them want interested in me in the first place. Like why did they recruit a user researcher for this role, and then why did they recruit me specifically for this role? What made them interested in me? And like answering that question goes a long way towards understanding what they're looking for. And once I understand what they're looking for, in some ways, that's understanding like we have this expression in user research called user needs. It's kind of like understanding their user needs, but from a stakeholder perspective. What are the stakeholders looking to get out of this relationship? And sometimes, like you could suggest ideas that they haven't thought of yet, and add to that. But first, you want to make sure that you at least address what they're looking for before you go on to something else.
Now, I'm going to ask you this because of your extensive experience in consulting and contracting, leading teams and being part of teams. How do you manage scope in a thing that is constantly evolving and contracting and expanding? How do you say this is the way that we work together and we have a handshake and I can manage your expectations around this work?
Ask a lot of questions. It's generally what a user researcher is good at is questions and just lean into that. I ask questions until I feel like I understood the topic well enough to understand the outlines of the discussion and what they're looking for. But also their time is valuable. Like the other thing that I've learned in my career is that people have time to answer questions, but not endless questions. And so, like, just try to prioritize your questions based off of what's important. It's for you to get that foothold. And then, if they have time to answer more questions, then you go ahead and ask those questions if it's okay with them. But then, eventually, sooner or later, you want to get to the point, and either that point could be a business proposal, like if you're like a contractor, or it could be an offer letter, or it could be just an agreement to start a project through an email, whatever it is. Like get it in writing, so that way, like it's clear. Because sometimes people forget. It's not just like people want to be. It's not like people want to be devious or anything. Like I mean, of course that does happen, but it's less likely. It's more like about like people might forget, or their wording might be different from your wording, and so when you get it in writing in some kind of shape or form, then you have understood like what they're looking for, and then you can kind of circle back later on. If you feel like the scope has changed, you can be like, well, this is what the scope said before. This is what we discussed. Now we're talking about adding something new. In order to add something new, we need to give it more time. And so like and probably also unless you're on if you're on a fixed budget, like more money. Like so like if it's time and materials, maybe you can work out like a change management approach. But regardless, like you want to anticipate changes before they happen. You're on mute.
Thanks. Those lines of questions and those doc sets of documentation that you kind of set as a paper trail, those are social contracts that sort of help to anchor the conversation and the work as you move forward, irrespective of the changes that come alongside that. You still have that be like the focus of how you're working through this project, right?
Yes, that becomes like the guiding principle. And you particularly like if you're like you mentioned like greenfield or startups, like if you're working in an environment like that, like you want to you want to be able to like stick to that, because the more that you add to it, like even if you as an individual are benefiting from like a larger income and money and all that, like you're delaying the process of launching the MVP, and that's good for everybody. Like you want to launch the MVP or the proof of concept as soon as possible, so that way the company does well. And so that, but even like if it's not in that kind of scenario, like let's suppose you're an experienced user researcher working in an experienced company, like that's been around the block. Like you still want to get to the point where you've launched your first project, and so like get to the point where you have like an output. It doesn't have to be fast, because like fast doesn't always mean good, but at least get there. So that way, like you can have something tangible to point to that you've done since joining.
Even if it's a pre-alpha launch and it's just for internal review, as long as you can get
Yeah,
a first cut, right?
people want to see that you're making progress.
Um,
At least it happens at the end of a question.
yeah, I don't know what's up with that timing. One thing that I'd love to get your perspective on for the juniors out there is there are people that have this paralysis by analysis, and they feel like just ingesting information is a
Mhm.
means to be comfortable and make safe decisions. Can you set the record straight and say we don't know what we're doing and we have to figure it out by doing the thing, and
Yeah,
that the only way to get it out and learn is to get it out and learn?
yeah, absolutely. Like that's what the iterative process is all about. Like you just have to get started, and like, and getting started is often like if you're feeling that fear that you have too much information and you don't know where to begin. Begin somewhere. Like at least get started somewhere so that you can because that it's a lot of it's psychological. Like like and that's internal to you as an individual. Like it's once you actually get started, then you start the process of brainstorming, and then you realize, hey, wait a minute, why don't we align with the product roadmap? Or maybe there's a research strategy document that's out there, or maybe there's a research roadmap. Just like try to find that your footing and go from there.
I think you've set some major themes to be successful in this field, the user research field. Ask lots of questions, check to make sure who's in the room, what their motivations are, what their pain points are, what they know or understand about the discipline, the higher level priorities of the organization, what stage that they're in terms of, are there things that have already been started, or is this something completely new and you have creative freedom as to how to take it forward? What are the expectations around the work that you're going to be doing? And how do you chunk that work in stages, and how do you ensure that everybody is in agreement to the vision of what you're going to be contributing
Absolutely.
to? What else can we add to that, to give a boost of confidence or validation to people that are just starting in this field, and they're like, well, I don't know what people expect from me. I know I'm supposed to do this thing, but you know.
AI can help with that. Like ask Chat GPT. If you're new to this field and first of all, of course, you can pick up a book. Like that's the way that I learned long before there was Chat GPT. It was like I picked up a book. Highly recommend if you're someone that's new to user research to pick up Steve Portigal. That's the author that I started from. He's a great author, great human being as well. But you can check out his books. There's also Nielsen Norman Group, which is available for free if you're new to the UX field. They have like an entire website that you can just check out and learn from. Highly recommend that you uh, do those. And then if you have further questions or you haven't understood something from those books, go to ChatGPT, ask a question, say like, I didn't get this, or I'm not sure that I understood that. Could you explain that? And then when ChatGPT gives you the answer, make sure that it makes sense, and then take it back to your team and see like whether they agree with you or not, and move forward from there.
I think that is an excellent advantage that we have now with ChatGPT, that we can gain that validation without having to be incumbent on our team members, right? Like we can have a pre-screen so that.
Yes. You don't want to waste people's time, if particularly like if you're new to the field, asking questions that they feel like you could have gone and figured out yourself. Like that, nobody likes that, and so try to avoid that. And by doing your own research from credible sources, and have some initiative going into those conversations, it creates a completely different field than spoon feeding information to someone that's new.
That's a good observation. What do you look for when you look for user experience researchers, or what do you look for when you're looking for someone that's uh, maybe just user experience and they have a spectrum of skills, or they've worked on a variety of projects, whether it's in research or design? How do you measure that they're a good candidate?
Well, for UX professionals in general, I want or any tech professional, period. I would look for a sense of initiative. I really admire people who are new to the tech industry, and have that sense of initiative. It's that sense of initiative for myself that led me to launch a business in UX with just 2 years of experience. And so I really see, when I see people like that, I see myself in them, and I see that that we're going to connect well and work well together. And so as one, like, and it's something that's very rare. It takes a certain amount of guts to be able to just go into something new and start doing things and experimenting. But then that's something that like it comes from within, and I know that person's going to do really well in their career, and that's someone that I want to work with. So that's first and foremost is like guts and initiative. Number two is like critical thinking is an important skill for any kind of UX professional. Like being able to think for yourself and not just take what I tell you and then just do it, because there's very little value in that. I want you to try to find holes in what I've said, and try to understand why I'm saying what I'm saying, and try to have some empathy for me, just like I have empathy for you as a new candidate. Have some empathy for me, so that it's a two-way street and we understand each other. And I feel like that's really important for any kind of working relationship. And a lot of these things come from within and can't be trained, or are very hard to be trained. And so, like if I see people like that, I know that they're going to do well, and they have like a unique set of skills. When it comes to user researchers specifically, I also want to look. One of the key areas is I want to see is curiosity. I want to see someone who always has another good, interesting question, because I feel like questions in our field are almost as important, if not more important, than answers. Just being able to have another question that you want to ask and explore and keep going with, that is something that I really appreciate in someone who's new to user research.
Well, Jan, I think we've covered quite a spectrum of topics, and I hope that this serves people that are in their career, starting or in the middle, or they find some insights that they hadn't considered before, especially the passionate ones. I'm a passionate one, so I've ran
Yes,
into those problems before, but I
it's
appreciate you.
good to it's good to love what you do, though. So I'm not knocking the passionate people. Just calibrate it. That's all.
It's how you go about it. It's how you deploy the passion.
That's
Um,
right.
Thank you for your time, Jan, and
Likewise.